Alright, this is Rob at RAM Automotive Garage with another do-it-yourself at-home project for you. What I have here is a common leaf blower, whatever you want to call it, by Echo. It's the PB-250LN, and it served me well for, I don't know, 5 years or so maybe. And over the past week, I did post a video of the problem that I'm having with this piece of equipment here. What happens is over the past week or two, when I use it, I could only get about a half hour out of it. And what happens is it shuts right off. I'll be blowing leaves away and blowing grass away, and all of a sudden it'll just shut right off. It doesn't run rough leading up to the shutdown. It runs perfectly fine, and then it just shuts right off as though somebody flipped the switch up here and just shut it off, which of course is not the case. So what I suspect is that it's the ignition coil. This is the ignition coil right here that I purchased. It's a cheap, I think it's a cheap, weird name I've never heard of, piece that I got off of Amazon, $21. You know, ideally I probably should have bought the Echo genuine product, but I don't know, I saw that for 21 bucks and I decided to give it a try. Why not? But I guess I should be. I don't know if the Echo one is American made or US made or not, but I know this one is Chinese made for certain, because it says on the box, and I've never heard of the name. But anyway, that's not the point. I suspect it is the ignition coil causing it to shut down. So I'm going to replace that and we'll see what happens. But the goal of this video is to show you how to replace that piece, which is a lot more complicated than you think. Essentially this whole clamshell on here, if you would, has to come apart, and basically you're going to be holding the engine in your hand when you're done taking this whole thing apart. You're going to be holding the engine because the coil, the spark plug is right here, but the coil is back over on this side of the equipment. So, you know, we have to get to that, and that requires taking a lot of screws out on this side, that side, of course the blower tube. So we'll do that. We'll start with that, and I'll show you how to go through the whole process of changing that coil out. The first, probably most simplest step is taking this blower tube off, because it's going to have to come off anyway. You could use the needle nose pliers closed, or you can use a Phillips head screwdriver because of the round part, and you just insert it in this hole here and lift up, and the blower tube pops right out. So we'll put that aside for now, and we'll move on to the rest of it. So the screws here on this side, you're going to see one here, right over here, right there, under the muffler right over here. So all these screws on this side have to come out. They are T27 bits. Now I'm not going to show myself removing those screws, because if you're viewing this video and you're going to attempt to change this part, I expect you have some knowledge, some mechanical knowledge. So you don't need me to help you remove screws. So I'm gonna pause my video here, and I'm gonna remove these screws, because I just think it's an unnecessary step in the video that just makes the video longer, and I want to keep your attention on this video so you know how to change the actual part. So I'm going to remove those screws, and we'll be right back. Alright, so after you have these 6 screws removed from the plastic from this side where the carburetor would be, the spark plug. So you got those 6 removed. You're going to remove your spark plug wire next. And I already loosened the spark plug because there's no sense in showing you that. You know how to do that. I trust you. So remove your plug, and this will allow you to take apart this half of the blower. So you'll move that off there and unhook the wire, and there's your side of the blower that where your pull start is, and your choke and your carburetor and your gas cap. So that's that part. And what we'll get into next is unhooking the ground for the electrical system on this blower, and the rod here that goes to the throttle for the carburetor. So we'll get into that next. And as you flip this blower around, you'll see you have the same exact kind of screws you just pulled out of the other side. They're all the same. They thread into plastic. It's kind of like they envelop the motor between those 2 pieces, and you know, it's kind of a roundabout way of getting to the coil. You know, I wish it was a little bit easier, but it's not. So basically, when you're done disassembling this whole thing, you're essentially going to be holding this motor in your hand at that point, because your ignition coil is on the back side here, which you still can't see. You can see the wire. The wire leads to it under here, and it's back in here. And when you have this all apart, you know, I just got some grease on my hands here from it. So, you know, when you have this all apart, you might as well just dip your parts, clean them all up. A lot of grease, you know, from several years of use. So you might want to do that. And after you're all done, the thing will look like brand new, right? It'll look like brand new. So, all right, we're going to get, next we're going to get into, as I said, we're going to take this side off. All the screws here, right here, here, right there, down here, over here. And it basically just comes apart like, again, like a sandwich, like it's holding the motor in between 2 pieces of bread, I guess, if you will. So then we'll get into taking the fan off, so we can finally pull this motor out all the way and get at that ignition coil. So that's our next step. Alright, so once you get that side cover off, you're going to want to take off your throttle trigger and the throttle arm. Just make sure you look at the way you take that apart and just put it back together the same way. One thing I find that's odd about this throttle setup is, over time I would think that this bar or arm, whatever you want to call it, can like maybe stretch and bend. Maybe you won't get like full throttle over the years of using it, I would think. But kind of an odd setup, but maybe I'm wrong about that. But anyway, the arm here slides out of the trigger and the trigger slides off. You can just set those aside. And here's another unusual setup, I think, is that the arm is kind of hooked into a cable that goes to the carburetor. Just an all-around odd setup, in my opinion, but yeah, make sure you take that out and make sure you put it back together that same way that you see right there. And also, you're going to want to unhook this ground right here. That's for the switch and probably the whatever else is wired in here. You know, as far as the ignition coil itself, it's just your ground. So you'll unhook that, and then we'll take off this other side cover and we'll be holding this motor in our hands, so you'll have the motor free and clear of this whole case. So we'll take out these bolts next, or screws next on this other side. So I'm going to pull this out. Again, there it is, just pulls right out, and you can just take the trigger and set it aside, and you'll take the throttle arm here and just kind of push it down and take it right out. I mean, there really is only one way to put this back, so your chances of getting it wrong are probably not that great. So, alright, and up next, we're going to take out all the screws on this side, which are also T27s. So there's 4 here, 5, 6, 7, and that's it on that. So we'll take those out, and then behind this cover there's the fan. I'll show you that in a second after I get all these screws out. Alright, so once you get all the screws out of this side, just simply pull this off, set it aside. You might want to take the opportunity to clean it up good since you have it all apart. Make it look shiny and new again. Anyway, here's the fan. This bracket holds the tube, the blower tube on. So if you want, just set that aside for now, but just note the way it goes in there. The longer arm down, shorter arm up. This is the arm that catches on the tube, so the tube doesn't fall out when another thing is turned on. So I'll just set that aside. And the fan here, we're going to take that off. That's a 13mm. We're going to take that off. And behind this, you'll have a few other bolts that will separate the engine from this part here. Alright, so once you have this screw loosened, again, that's 13mm. Sometimes they're a little tough to get off, but you just have to hold this fan, kind of just lean down on it, and you'll get it. They're not super tight. So you got a washer there, and you got your 13mm. So just set those aside. You'll take your fan off. So there's the fan. Again, you can clean all this stuff up while you have it apart. Why not? Make it look like new again, right? Alright, so here are the remaining screws. These are the final 4 screws that will loosen the motor from this part, the body. So we'll get those last 4 screws out. Again, I don't show me taking out screws, because I'm assuming that if you have the mechanical knowledge to tackle this job in the first place, then you already know how to take screws out. So I'm not going to show, I will never show me removing screws unless it's some kind of a critical area where maybe a screw is hard to remove or a screw is stripped out. Then I'll show you what I do in a case like that. So, alright, I'm going to get these final 4 screws out, and we'll separate the body from the motor, and that will expose this coil that we bought here. So we'll put that on, and then we'll do a test run on this to make sure it is indeed okay. Alright, so once you have the 4 final screws removed from here, you can now pull the motor away from the plastic body. Just be careful of these wires here. This wire right here actually unhooks. There's a fitting on this one that I can't seem to pull apart. There we go. Alright, so yeah, pull that one apart so you don't break it when you're pulling the motor away from the body. Alright, so there's the engine by itself. And here is the part that we're going to replace. Now exposed. That's the ignition coil. That's what I believe is causing this blower to shut down on me while I'm using it. So this has 2 screws. Unplug that wire. There's your spark plug wire. The new one came with spark plug wire already attached. And we'll get that in. And then I'll show you how to gap the coil and the flywheel here. You have the magnets on here. It's similar to like the way old schoolers used to gap the points on an ignition system or distributor system in a car, where they would use a matchbook, the cardboard as the gauge to gap it. So we're going to do something similar here. I'm going to use like a business card as a shim and put it in there, and we'll show you how to do that. So I'll just take your coil out, discard that one. I think this is also a T27. No, actually this is a different size. What do we have here? I gotta check and see what size that is. I believe that's a T30. Alright, we'll see. Let me check that and see what size we have here. Alright, so these 2 bolts on your ignition coil are T27s. So I'll take those 2 off. They shouldn't be too hard to get off there, to get out. Set those aside. Now this wire that comes off right here, this wire you are going to reuse because the new coil does not come with that wire. What I was talking about earlier about gapping this coil is, if you're familiar with this sort of thing, you have your magnets that are on the flywheel here, and there's a gap in between those magnets and this part of the coil right here, because obviously it can't touch the flywheel, because you'll do some damage to the flywheel or the ignition coil itself. So you want to make sure that gap is there. I don't know if it's possible to make it touch. Maybe Echo has this designed in a way that if you push it too far down, maybe it does not touch the flywheel anyway. I'm not really quite sure on that. Alright, so just pull this out. There's your spark plug wire coming with it, and there's a little grommet on here. Just make sure that stays on there. And on this there's actually not grommet. Let's see if that's split. If that's split, I can reuse that. So let's set this motor up against here for now. Otherwise it will fall. Oh, this is... Okay, so this is split anyway. I can reuse this grommet, but it looks like it's starting to deteriorate pretty good. Well, if it stays on, it stays on. Let's see what it does. Alright, so that's your old coil. Again, take that wire off. That's it. That's how you remove the coil, the ignition coil, from an Echo blower. Alright, let's put the new one on. So here's the new coil, right here. We'll hook this wire up first. And again, you might have to support your engine, just don't let your engine go, so it'll flop over on you. Just make sure the area is clean of debris. You know, right in here, the threads. Just make sure you close your eyes if you're gonna blow into these holes to get any debris out. Otherwise your eyes will be full of those debris. And while you have everything apart, you might as well inspect your engine to make sure you have no head gasket leaks or anything like that. So this one looks pretty decent. Yeah, it looks pretty good. And there's your magnets right there for that come in, that transmit electrical signal to the coil. Okay, and just put your coil back in. Hopefully that's the right one. Yeah, it looks like it's the right one. Sometimes these off brands, these Chinese brands I've never heard of, sometimes you gotta watch buying them. You never know. Oh, I almost made a mistake. I was trying to put that on backwards. Let's turn it around. Alright, you just feed the, or push the grommet here back in right there. I don't like the fact that this one, alright, well I'm going to reuse again. Reuse this one here. I wish they had a new one with this, because this one's starting to really deteriorate on me here. I'm not even sure it's supposed to split like that, but it did. Alright, shove that back in there. Okay, you're ready to put your screws in. Don't fall on me. Again, wipe the debris off the screws. Better off getting all the dirt out of the threads anyway. Okay, so once we get these tightened up, I'll show you how to gap this. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to show you how to gap the ignition coil to the flywheel. So as you turn the flywheel, here's your magnets right here. 1, 2. There's 2 of them. So you line them up with the coil, and you'll see that when they're lined up, each magnet will hit a point on the ignition module, ignition coil I mean, or module, whatever you prefer. And you're going to gap that because this cannot be hitting the flywheel. I found out that the adjustment does have that much play in it where if you adjusted it too far down, it will hit the flywheel, and that will cause damage to either this part or the flywheel, and more than likely bind it right up when it's trying to run. So what I do is I take a couple of business cards, because it's kind of hard to stick a shim or a gauge in there. So I take a business card. I actually have 2 business cards right here, and I'm going to put them in here as a shim. Well, not as a shim. That wasn't the right word. A gap gauge. So at this point, unloosen your screws on the ignition module. Alright, so they're unloosened, and you're going to push down on this module. Push down. Not really hard, just push down, that's all. Remember, I have 2 business cards here acting as my gauge. So I'm pushing down lightly on this, and I'm tightening the screws back up. Again, they're T27, so there's no need to tighten them too much. As with anything, just hand tighten it. Don't use power tools to tighten anything up on this, because a lot of these screws thread into plastic, so you don't want to use any kind of power tools to tighten. There's no reason for that. Alright, so these are snugged. Just make sure you snug it enough where it's not going to come loose while you're using it, because you have a lot of vibration in this type of engine. Little 1-cylinder engine, they vibrate a lot. And then just slide that out of there. And what I would do, just to make sure, is I would spin the flywheels. The flywheel's only going to spin one direction, and that's, well, looking at it from the camera, that's counterclockwise. So spin it along, full rotation. Alright, there's no binding. You'll feel it, and more than likely hear it, if there's any binding going on here. Just do that a few times. That's your air gap. That's it. You're now ready to put this thing back together and blow. Yes, indeed. You're ready to do some blowing. Alright. Alright, so as any good mechanic would tell you, put it back together the way you took it apart. So we're going to reverse all the steps. And now we're going to start with this, with the pretty much the, I don't know if I would call it the main part of the body, but if you're looking at the blower from the back and the tube is out that way, this will be the left side, and the engine will mount in here. So, and there's your inside where the fan would go, right there. So if you look back further back in the video, or further back in the video, you'll see that that's where I took the fan from. Alright, so we're going to mount the engine back in from this side here. The gas tank sits, of course, on these rubber grommets right here. So we'll do that. Let's see what kind of how I can do this. Now don't forget too. Now you don't have to do this step, but I did. I took out the on-off button, and that controls the engine power. I took this off because I cleaned, well, maybe not very well, but I cleaned this inside, so I took those electronics out. So I'll show you how to put those back in, but you do not have to take those out. I just chose to do that. Alright, let's see how we put this back in here. There you go. Just hold it up. That way you can see what you're doing to line it up right there. Alright, so that will stay in there. So there's no need to put the bolts back in. I am just kidding about that. So we'll get these screws back in. Now remember, these screws, the 4 right here, hold the engine on to this part of the body. They're the black ones that we were dealing with. 4 of them. The silver screws, like that one, that are all the same length, those are just for plastic body to body contact. So just keep that in mind. Alright, so here's our 4th screw. And again, just make sure the threads are free of debris. Alright, again, T27. And start putting it back together. And that's it. You're on the home stretch here, and you're going to do some serious blowing after this. Alright, that one's in. So you get it. You get the point, though. That you're going to put the motor back into this part of the body first. This would be the part of the body that if your blower has cruise control like mine does, there's the button. That's that part of the body. The other part of the body is this one with the vent. Obviously, you're not going to be working with this yet. Not yet. Alright, so once you get these 4 screws back in, now it's going to be time to put your fan on. So again, the fan, I cleaned that all up. I really cleaned it up pretty good since I had it apart. So the fan has these 3 slots here, circular slots that line up with the slots on the crankshaft coming out of the engine. What are we at here? That goes in one way, obviously. wonderful if I could see a little bit more clear. All right, I'm having trouble lining this up. All right, there it is. All right, so you have your washer and your 13 millimeter and your washer here. All right, so tighten that fan down, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, I reinstalled my the on-off switch, and if you did take these things out to clean the rest of the body of the unit, I just, you know, it fits back in a groove here, and the wires run down right there. And don't forget to plug this wire back in if you took this apart. You know, you don't have to. I just chose to do that because I wanted to clean the body up a little bit. So make sure you put these back together. Make sure they go back together completely. Otherwise the unit won't run. It's a little dark in the cellar. I apologize for that. It's just the way it is. Tuck these back in. This is your ground, if you recall. Push that back in the groove right here to make sure that wire is held steady. Okay. All right, and as I said, this is your ground. So you're going to put that back right there. And this is this small short screw. That's the one for the ground. We'll put that back in. I'm going to work on just this side of the unit for now so we can get the engine covering back on, the spark plug back in, etc. Again, with everything on this unit, there's no need to over tighten anything on here. There's no reason to use power tools to tighten things down. It's not required. Okay, so that's good to go. All right, we got the switch in, we got that hooked up. Of course, your spark plug is not back in there yet, so we'll wait on that. And next, we're going to install this side cover, and then we'll move on to the other side. Okay, a pretty important step here is going to be getting your throttle trigger back in and the throttle arm, which I showed you earlier. These two pieces right here. So the trigger mounts right there. And the other part of the throttle arm mounts right here, but first you have to come down here and get the ball. There's a wire cable right here that I showed you earlier that you'll have to make sure is mounted correctly inside this loop. Let me see if I can show you that a little bit closer. A little bit more of a close-up. Let's see here. So I'll come up behind the cable and that little ball there. Like that. It's not exactly what I meant to do. It's hard to hold this camera at the same time. Excuse me. Got some allergies going on here. Trying to give you a little bit more of a close-up here. I suspected this part was going to be a little difficult. So the cable, or the arm, goes this way in. So we're going to grab onto that. Of course, it never goes the way it should go. Alright, so I think I got it. I'm going to put the wire, or the throttle arm, back into the trigger here. Alright, so yeah, I have it in place. It's exactly where it should be. I wish my light was a little bit more bright than that. Alright, so it's in place. I hope you got a good close-up of that. That was a little bit hard to do. Okay, so that's in place, and what we'll do next is we're going to put the so I'm not sure if that goes up over that or not, because it seems to press on that wire on the throttle. Let's see. Alright, so yeah, it seems to be more better that way. Don't hold me to that yet. I want to make sure that I'm doing this right. Alright, so next we're going to put the cover on the pull side start of the motor. Alright, this part here, when you're putting this side cover back on, that'll be this piece here. You know, the spark plug comes up through this hole. You gotta really make sure that when you're doing this part, that everything is routed properly. here's your throttle, or here's your trigger, the throttle. Here's the throttle arm. Spark plug wire, very critical right here, because I tried to put this back together a couple of times while I had the video camera off, and it binds with this rod, and it will hold the rod wide open, which means your throttle will be wide open and it won't return. So you got to make sure you route this spark plug wire properly so it won't interfere with that throttle rod. So here's where the spark plug wire comes up out of, right here, and there's a groove back in here and down here, and you're going to route it in behind the throttle rod to keep it free and clear of it. Otherwise you're going to have throttle issues with this, so you got to be very careful the way you put this back together. So I have it routed back there, and I did have it pop out on me a few times already, so I'm trying to hold it there to hope that it won't pop back out, because it was a pain in the neck. So I'm going to try to put the cover back on right now and see if I can get it to hold, because once the cover is back on, I'm sure that there's parts of the cover that hold that wire in place. You know, there's a channel right there that hopefully will do that and not bind my throttle arm. So let's see. Now you gotta, you know, the way these go back together, you just gotta be careful the way you put it back together. Make sure your on-off button up here is mounted properly. First of all, make sure all the wires are tucked in the way they should be. Alright, so that's good. Everything's tucked in. And we're going to come back down through here. It's not as easy as you would think. Not on this one. This one's a little bit tricky, and it's mainly because of that wire. Because of that spark plug wire and the throttle arm. So we'll see what happens here. See, it kind of binds going in. This is the only thing that makes me a little nervous about this whole procedure, is how it binds when it's getting put back together. You know, because you got to make sure everything is right on the money, or your throttle will not work right. So make sure you're good there. Alright, so it seems to have fallen in place. Let's see what happens now. Throttle. Now see, throttle's not working. So yeah, I didn't get this right. Yeah, something's definitely not right here. I am definitely having some issues with this part of it. Alright, so I'm gonna go back to the drawing board here for a moment and see what happens, but I'm definitely having problems with this part. I've tried like several times already to try to get this to not bind. You know, you don't want your throttle sticking like that, because it's bad. So I'll let you know what I come up with. I'm going to experiment here a little bit with this, because this is my first time doing this on this particular model. I've changed these before, but not on this model. So I'll be right back with you. Alright, so after a little bit of troubleshooting here, you know, putting this cover back on the pull start side of the equipment, the throttle cable, or throttle rod and subsequently cable down here, it was binding somehow. I'm not really sure how, because I cannot see inside here after I put it together, obviously. But I will say this, I ran this spark plug cable wire up over the top of the throttle rod. I was going to run it underneath and to the back of it and fish it down and up this way, but I just couldn't get the thing to stop binding that way, so I ran it up over the top of the throttle rod, and it seems to be fine now. You know, the throttle seems to be working perfectly fine, but it did take some troubleshooting to get this to work right, because when I was pulling the throttle, it would just stick and it wouldn't, you know, come back down to its rest position. So yeah, it was kind of a pain in the butt, and maybe I'm the only one that's ever had this issue with it, but I don't know, whatever. But I'm not going to take it back off, because I have a funny feeling that if I do, I'm going to be here for another half hour trying to get this thing to not bind. But, you know, again, I ran the wire, spark plug wire, up over the top of the throttle rod that comes down to here. So that's how I did it. Alright, and now we're going to put these screws back in this side. All the screws we took out that hold the body together. So we're going to do that. One thing you might want to do first, though, is get the spark plug back in. Alright, it's, you know, as you're putting everything back together, you don't want anything to fall on the engine. So I'm going to put the spark plug back in now, and make sure that's that engine hole is sealed up, because I don't want anything getting in there. So put that back in, and then we'll move on to this, to the screws to hold the body together. And as I said, after I'm done putting this together, I'm going to give it a nice test. We'll test it out, make sure everything is good to go. I'm just snugging that up for now. Actually, you know what? Let's just tighten it. Oh, and make sure, unlike me, make sure you have a regular 3/4 or 19mm spark plug socket, because I had to use this impact because I don't have a 19mm spark plug socket or a regular 3/8 19mm socket. For some reason, it's the only socket I seem to be missing. So I'll make sure you have it, because this is too hard to do this way. You know, an impact socket will not fit down in there. You really have to force it down in there, because it will not fit. Let's see if I can get a wrench in there. No, absolutely not. That's not going to happen. Wrench will not go in there. You know, you would think they would make these, and there's your 5/8. I mean, but obviously that's not going to work. But you would have thought they would have made these, you know, 5/8, so they wouldn't have to be this big. You know, I mean, they're absolutely gigantic, these plugs. I don't get that. I don't get why they're that size for such a small piece of equipment. The problem with what I'm doing here is obvious. I cannot get the ratchet all the way down in the socket. But I literally have no other way to tighten this. Ridiculous. The one socket I'm missing is the one I need. So hook your spark plug wire back up. Alright, and just, you know, when you do that, make sure your throttle is still working. So that seems to be fine. And then you'll put all your screws back in on this side. Alright, so once you have all your screws back in on this side, just double check everything. Your spark plug wire up. Everything's good, throttle, cable, all that's good. So we're going to move on to this side here. And you remember this piece here. This is the piece that holds your blower tube in. It's kind of a lock. Put that right there, long side down, like I told you earlier. Long side down. And then we're going to put the side cover on this side. Fan's already in place. We covered that already, so here's your remaining side cover, all cleaned up and ready to go. This is probably the easiest part, really, to put on this unit. This is probably the easiest part you're gonna do. Much make a liar out of me. It'll end up being the hardest part that I've done. Alright, so yeah, it was as easy as I thought it was going to be. Alright, so then just snug your bolts down. Again, don't use power tools, not in plastic. I mean, if you want to, that's up to you, but I don't because they will end up stripping it out, and it's plastic, so you're not going to be able to fix it. Alright, so you get it though. There it is. That's how you change the ignition coil module on an Echo PB-250LN blower. So in a little bit here, after I'm done putting the finishing touches on this, I am going to go outside and run this for an extended period of time. Because again, when it was shutting down on me, it was only running for about a half hour, maybe less. You know, it would run for about a half hour or less, and then it would shut off. It would shut off just like somebody hit the switch. So I'm going to go outside and do that, test it out, and I will let you know if changing the ignition coil worked. I can't see it being anything else because other than it shutting down unexpectedly, it doesn't run rough. It runs smoothly up until shutting down. Now if it was running rough, then I would say it's probably a carburetor issue. You know, carburetor's clogging up, or needs a fuel filter or something. But this was not doing that. So I will let you know shortly if everything works out. Alright, so there it is, all back together again, except for the tube. So just make sure, you know, put your tube on. It only goes on one way. You know, you got grooves here, groove here, and just push it in there and until it clicks in. Time for a test run. Alright, so this has been running for a little bit, and I'm going to run it for a little bit more right now just to make sure that it's not going to shut down again.
Oh.
It's fixed. It definitely was the ignition coil. I'm going to run it for a little bit longer though. It's been running, before I started the video back up, I had it running about 10 minutes prior to this. Alright, that seems to have fixed it. So I'll tell you to change the ignition coil on an Echo PB-250LN blower. Again, I bought that part on Amazon. It was like 21 bucks, but it seems to have done the job. If you have any questions, put them in the comments and give me a like if this video helped you at all. Thanks for watching.